Hello and welcome back to this damn plagiaristic crusade. This video is a disc review of the new Kino Lorber release of a Universal Pictures 4K restoration of the 1923 silent film Landmark starring Lon Chaney Sr., of course referring to the Hunchback of Notre Dame, with Chaney's just groundbreaking, defining performance as Quasimodo, one of the great performances of not just silent cinema, but cinema in general. This is also one of the great silent films that you can turn new viewers onto, or young viewers onto silent films with. It has a scope and a scale that is still remarkable today, even as a silent film, and Universal poured tons of money and into this production. It became one of their super productions. It was, of course, ridiculously successful, which meant they would try again with Chaney to do another super production with a sort of historical background, and that led to The Phantom of the Opera 2 years later in 1925. Now, like Phantom, Hunchback is no stranger to have been, ravaged by the passage of time. And unfortunately, just like the 1925 Phantom of the Opera, Hunchback of Notre Dame only exists in a 16mm show-at-home print, which means that this film was essentially saved, like the original version of Phantom, by an early form of home video, by these prints Universal made as part of, again, their show-at-home program. And thus, Hunchback only exists as a 16mm film. So that means all versions and all copies and all restorations have that same basis to work from, is 16mm sources. There is no surviving 35mm source, and in one of the great shames, Universal junked their entire silent film library after the dawn of sound, only keeping materials that had sound portions or sound elements, which is why we have the fancier version of the sound version, the slightly talky reshot remake 1929-1930 versions of Phantom of the Opera, which is why most restorations work from those. So with Hunchback, it's been very compromised what we've had to work with and all the versions we've seen over the years. So it's never going to look as impressive as it could, and it should. This is a beautiful film that, unfortunately, we only have one source to work from. So older versions have done the best that they could, and it's been a process of new restoration tools becoming available, and especially in the digital realm, and then trying to go back to the well and see what you can pull out of the source. I've got behind me the old Blackhawk Films first major Laserdisc attempt. There were two major Laserdiscs. The later one was in, I think, about 1996 or so, and there have been several DVD attempts, and then the last Blu-ray was released by Flicker Alley. That was the best the film had looked and sounded up to this point, but that was a very expensive release as well. It's about $30 to $40 list price usually. So that's why I had not yet gotten a copy. I'd meant to. It had been on my list for ages. I'd just never gotten around to it. So it was a nice surprise to hear that Universal was going back to the well and doing a 4K restoration themselves, because again, this is one of the key core iconographic Universal titles, along with Phantom of the Opera, which apparently they are working on a 4K of Phantom, which is beyond necessary, because if Hunchback has had problems on home video and has trouble with the sources, well, Phantom, you could write a book on the subject, and I will be doing a review of the Kino disc I have behind me, which is a huge mixed bag. But Phantom, again, that's a whole other thing. You can write a book on the versions alone of Phantom of the Opera. So at least Hunchback doesn't have that particular problem. But if this restoration and this work from Universal is any indicator of what their 4K version of Phantom of the Opera could be like, we may be in for a treat, because this disc is astonishing. I don't know how Universal did it, but they have managed to produce a version of Hunchback of Notre Dame that looks and sounds better than I've ever seen this. I've only seen really terrible public domain copies. The older Blackhawk versions on Laserdisc were pretty good for the time. The DVD attempts have been, each step has been a step forward. And then I've seen the Flicker Alley version, but I've just never owned it. So I thought that was as good as it was ever going to get. But this manages to advance on that and come in at a much lower price point. You can get this at Kino's website. It was included in some of their last sales, and it's a brand new release. So I was astonished that it's even better quality than the much more expensive Flickr Alley version. It doesn't carry over the extras of the Flickr Alley version, but it does have extras of its own, so that at least makes it a bit more enticing. It's not a full-blown special edition, but I think you could call it that, since most Kino discs are bare bones. So in terms of what you get in the disc, you get the lovely art on the disc itself, and you get a full insert, which again is rare for Kino titles. So this is basically reproducing, I believe this is a version of the original souvenir program. That's beautifully done. And then we get a lovely essay by Michael Blake. So this is a full booklet. Again, a full booklet from Kino is a rare, very, extremely rare thing. It's packed with some nice stills, so I'd say this is one of the best booklets I've ever seen from Kino. Again, it's a rarity from them. So it's not the longest thing in the world, but again, it's a nice essay and pretty substantial. So to get a booklet like this from a Kino release is just like, wow, I did not expect that. Then in terms of extras, to go over those, because this is, again, legitimately a special edition, I would say. Farron Smith-Neame, the critic, does a pretty good audio commentary. I've listened to that. It was a nice listen. Then, again, the booklet essay, as I just showed. The on-disc extras include a really fun, it's called the Life in Hollywood newsreel, but it's basically going into Universal at the time and seeing the various stars and notables walking around, so you get that great time capsule you are there sense. And what you're going to watch it for in terms of Hunchback and Lon Chaney is there's actually a part where Chaney is just walking onto the Hunchback set, and they stand in front of the cathedral set itself, and it's Chaney just in his normal street clothes, and it's just again just incredible to see that. Then in a similar way, there's actually a entire bit of 16 millimeter home movies of Chaney at, it looks like his desert summer house or something, just literally for the weekend with some friends, and then a family get together. So you will see, you're going to be trying to spot him, and eventually he does appear, but you'll see Creighton Chaney, who course became better known as Lon Chaney Jr. So it's really interesting to see the very intimate side of Chaney's home life in these actual personal home movies, and they've been transferred well. So it's just fascinating to see. There's no audio accompaniment because of course they're silent, but it's so interesting to see actual footage of Chaney just in normal everyday scenarios outside the famous films. Then also on the disc, there are a couple of slideshows. It does reproduce the original production book, and it also has a stills slideshow. So you'll be able to go through those, and it's well done, and you're able to actually see everything, which isn't always what you get on photo slideshows. Then there's also another slideshow with various publicity materials and correspondence about the film. So I always appreciate, if they can't print those, I do appreciate their inclusion, even if they're just a slideshow. And then it does credit the actual composers of the new score for this release by Nora Kroll Rosenbaum and Laura Karpman. I will say, now getting into the transfer side of things, I did really enjoy the score. I thought it was very fitting. I'd say there's maybe one or two moments that sounded maybe a tad modern, but that's maybe getting into a little bit of nitpicking. I did really enjoy the score. Again, I think it's probably about the best score for Hunchback I've heard. I've not heard every single one, and of course, because it's also in public domain areas, you can basically make a score of your own if you want to. But it's also very hard to score a silent film and make it fully effective, so anytime a score can be rousing in the right places and emotional in the others and really get the spirit of the film across, I give it full marks. I'll show you the rear cover really quickly. So again, the main attraction here is this disc is absolutely stunning. I don't know how Universal did it. I also think the color tinting is really well done. It's never too much. It's very difficult, just like scoring a silent film, it's very difficult to do the color tinting and even when you have a reference print to work from, it's very hard to fully replicate that in the digital realm 100% all the time. A lot of silent film restorations can get too carried away and also can start to obscure details and crushing black levels and things like that. And I was really impressed at how they did this. Again, it is rather comparable to the Flicker Alley release, but there is an additional sense of detail that's here on this new release, which again is amazing because it's from the same 16 millimeter show at home source. It's not like they discovered a 35 millimeter print somewhere, which would of course be amazing. It's like some sort of alchemy. They've gone back and Universal has somehow pulled extra bits out of the same source. Again, I don't know how they've achieved it, but it is miraculous. This is without question the best version of Hunchback of Notre Dame on home video that's ever existed. This can be shown in a theater from a DCP and you'll be blown away. I mean, it's that's what I was doing sitting here. So this was a beautiful surprise from Kino, and it'll save you a heck of a lot over getting the Flicker Alley release. But if you want every last extra, you will have to get theirs. And of course, different releases have different scores. So if you're a fan of a particular score, you have to, of course, track down which release it's on. And of course, silent films don't really play the best with the Blu-ray formatting, so you do have to worry about frame rate and how it's handled on the disc. I didn't detect any problems with this particular release, but I know I'm not as much of an expert as real silent film aficionados are, because some releases can look excellent and sound excellent, but until you really put it under the microscope and go through frame by frame and see, does it frame jump, does it frame skip, does it frame tear, because the Blu-ray format cannot handle multiple aspect ratios, and so everything is usually packed inside a 24 frame per second container, and that means they have to do all kinds of tricks to get it to work. Some of them are a bit nefarious and sneaky, and again, until you literally put it under the microscope, like a lot of the real silent film experts do, and then can relate various issues that they have, it's a lot harder to spot. I didn't notice anything with this particular release, and I was very pleased at how it turned out. But again, it is entirely possible that there can be some frame rate trickery, as there is with pretty much any silent film release. But I will say, on the surface, this is absolutely incredible and is a night and day difference over Kino's release of Phantom. So I'm really hoping that the rumored Universal 4K restoration of Phantom of the Opera will happen, will be of the 1925 version. If it could look like this, oh my God, it would be just unbelievable. Because this, again, for the sub $20 price this goes for, I got this, I did get it in their sale, but it is regularly, I think, like $17.99, which is, for silent films, that's dirt cheap, because usually silent films are on smaller labels, or they carry a premium price tag, like the Flicker Alley release, which regularly retail for about $40. So you're already at less than half the cost of the older release, and it's much improved in picture quality. Again, this is an astonishing disc. It's a must-own for silent film fans. It's a must-own for Chaney fans, of course. But I mean, if you're even the most remotely interested in getting into silent films, or you want to see a really beautiful silent film presentation on Blu-ray, this is unbelievable. Again, I never thought Hunchback would look this good. I was just blown away. So this is without question going to be in my best discs of 2021 roundup, which I'm still working on. I like to really think those out before I start handing out awards. But the low price point, the good encoding, the lovely score, the fact this has actual extras. I do like the color, the color and the tinting of the cover art. I actually thought that was really well done, very very simple. And the rear, it's a bit more, it's much more special than a typical Kino release. It looks much more like, say, a Cohen Film Group release in terms of the art, and it's actually got a booklet. It's got a commentary. It's got extras on the disc. I can't believe that this hasn't been talked about as much, because this is, without question, one of the releases of 2021. I'd go ahead and probably argue this is the silent film release of 2021, the best silent film disc release. And it is a distinct improvement over the old, rather pricey Flicker Alley release that was being used, mastered from the same 16 millimeter source. So please get a copy of this. Don't hesitate. It is a beautiful disc and a real surprise from Kino, who is much more about the quantity of releases over more special editions and discs that have attention to care and detail like this one does. So this is one of the gems of Kino's massive amount of discs they released in 2021. In fact, it probably is, I think, the Kino disc of 2021, just as I think it is the silent film disc of 2021. It's an astonishing release. And again, this is a film that you can use to introduce silent films to people. It doesn't do, all of Hugo's novel. It does change some things because, of course, it was 1923. And in terms of the best version of Hunchback of Notre Dame, it is definitely between the 1923 version and the sound remake RKO did with Charles Laughton in 1939. Both have the scale and they have the gravity of the original story. They both have great commanding performances of different versions of Quasimodo, but it is Chaney's performance as Quasimodo in the silent version that conveys such a sense of pain and agony and pathos that made it such a legendary thing, and only advanced the name and the legend of the Men of a Thousand Faces. So it's hard to compare all the versions of Hunchback because this one just towers over it simply for Chaney's performance and the epic production scale. The 1939 version has some positives. It is able to do a bit more than the silent version, but then it doesn't have quite the level of pathos of Chaney's performance. So I find they're actually very comparable in those ways. So they are the two versions of Hunchback that sort of just completely tower over the rest. And this is still a really well done silent film. It does clock in at about 2 hours. It is a bit longer than you'd expect, and of course, depending on the frame rate of the copy you're watching, the time, the runtime will vary slightly. But again, it's not perfect. Some people say it's not in the greatest of silent films, which I can understand, but I think it's definitely one of the most iconic, without question. And it still plays really, really well. I sort of just fell into the world of the story rewatching it. It had been some time since I'd seen the Flicker Alley version, which was the last time I had seen the film, and I just kind of fell in love with it all over again. Even though it is a little long and it does change quite a bit from the original book, which I've never read the whole thing. I've always meant to, so now I really want to go and finally read the whole thing. But for its iconic status and this beautiful restoration, I think this is a wonderful silent film gateway, and it is one of the best discs of 2021, probably the best Kino Lorber release of 2021, and probably the best silent film release of 2021. So please do yourself a favor and look at Chaney's legendary performance as Quasimodo in this beautiful new release based on the Universal Pictures restoration of the 1923 Hunchback of Notre Dame.